Hello, welcome to Health Bites. Today's topic is one of the leading causes of death in the U.S., diabetes. Nearly 24 million Americans have the disease, and another 57 million people have prediabetes. Prediabetes is a condition in which individuals have blood glucose levels that are higher than normal, but not high enough to be considered diabetes. But people with prediabetes have an increased risk in developing type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. About 6 million people have diabetes and they don't even know it, and it is the 7th leading cause of death in this country. Well, what is diabetes? Diabetes is a condition in which not enough insulin is produced in the body or it can't be used properly. Insulin is a hormone and it acts as a key that helps glucose or sugar to get into our cells. So what gas is to our cars, glucose is to our cells. In this condition of diabetes, the body is unable to use or handle glucose or sugar. So sugar builds up to dangerous levels in the blood, and also the body cannot use the energy nutrients. That's the carbohydrates, the protein, and the fat. It cannot use them in their usual way. There are two types of diabetes. Type 1 diabetes affects about 5% of diabetics. They are usually thinner, usually begins in childhood, and they are insulin dependent. And then there is type 2 diabetes. This is called adult onset diabetes, although that term may not be as relevant or as accurate nowadays, because we find that younger and younger people are developing this type of diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is non-insulin dependent and it affects 90 to 95% of diabetics. It usually begins around the age of 50 to 55, so as people are getting older and heavier. And these people have plenty of insulin in their bodies, but sometimes or something blocks that insulin from functioning correctly. So it usually begins as insulin resistance. It's a disorder in which the cells do not use insulin properly. And as the need for insulin rises, the pancreas gradually loses the ability to produce it. Symptoms are not very noticeable or obvious at first, early on in the disease. Remember that 6 million people have diabetes and don't even know it. But symptoms include increased thirst, increased appetite, increased urination, infections and cuts that don't heal, blurred vision, weight loss, and fatigue. There are simple tests for diabetes, and everyone age 45 and over should have a blood glucose test about every 3 years. Well, if you have a fasting blood glucose level of 70 to 100, that is considered normal. But if your fasting blood glucose level is between 100 to 125, you have prediabetes. And if your fasting blood glucose level is above 126, then you have diabetes. There are two causes of type 2 diabetes. Number one, increased fat in the body, and number two, high dietary fat intake. Even small amounts of weight gain can increase your risk. So a 5-pound weight gain increases your risk for diabetes by 10%. What happens is that the more fat there is in the body, the more resistant the cells are to insulin. Well, this insulin resistance leads to a condition called Syndrome X, or the metabolic syndrome. You've probably heard of that. Metabolic syndrome is a combination of disorders that increase the risk of developing cardiovascular disease and diabetes, and it affects 1 in 5 people, and the prevalence increases with age. So the metabolic syndrome is quite common, even though most people may not realize that they have it. Well, you will know in just a few moments if you have the metabolic syndrome, because having any three of the following traits will qualify you or meets the criteria for the metabolic syndrome. So if you have an abdominal obesity or a waist circumference of over 40 inches for men and over 35 inches for women, or if your triglycerides are over 150, or if you are taking medication to lower your triglycerides or your cholesterol, or if your HDL cholesterol or your good cholesterol is below 40 for men and below 50 for women, if your blood pressure is at or above 130 over 85, or if your fasting blood glucose level is above 100. So even just having one of these traits will increase your risk for diabetes and heart disease. But if you have three of these, then you have the metabolic syndrome. So even though discovering that you have syndrome X is bad news, the good news is that you can reduce your risk for type 2 diabetes and even reverse diabetes by making healthful lifestyle choices. Yes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. A study in the New England Journal of Medicine showed that preventing diabetes is the best option, when possible, for reducing the complications and the risk for diabetes. This study looked at whether medication or lifestyle would be most effective in preventing diabetes. So people who were overweight and had pre-diabetes were randomly assigned to one of three groups, and that was the placebo group, the medication group, or the lifestyle intervention group. After almost 3 years of follow-up, the results showed that the incidence of diabetes was 58% lower in the lifestyle intervention group and 31% lower in the metformin or the medication group compared to the placebo group. So both prevention therapies were effective. That was the medication and the lifestyle intervention. But the lifestyle intervention group was nearly twice as effective at lowering the risk of diabetes than the medication group. There are 4 keys to beating diabetes. Number 1, decrease fat and avoid added oil and grease in your diet. Number 2, eat more natural fiber-rich foods. Number 3, avoid refined foods, drinks, and snacks. And number 4, be physically active. And if you are overweight, all of these lifestyle habits will help you lose weight. And that is one of the most important things you can do to beat diabetes. Well, let's look at each of these points in more detail. Number 1, decrease fat and avoid added oil and grease in your diet. One of the first things you can do to decrease fat in your diet is to eat less animal products. These contain fat, especially cholesterol and saturated fat, which are linked to heart disease, insulin resistance, and certain forms of cancers. Well, here are some additional tips for lowering your fat intake. You want to use non-stick cookware. Use less oil, butter, and fat than a recipe calls for. Eliminate the dabs of butter from casserole toppings and vegetables. Avoid frying and only cook very lean meats, or better yet, eat no meat at all. Steam or microwave vegetables instead of sautéing them in butter or oil, and use non-stick spray. Our second key was to eat more natural fiber-rich foods, such as grains, legumes, fruits, and vegetables. Recent studies show that a low-fat, plant-based diet is more effective in reversing diabetes than the American Diabetes Association diet. In a study reported in the journal Diabetes Care, the authors state that vegan and lacto-ovo vegetarian diets were associated with a a nearly 1/2 reduction in risk of type 2 diabetes compared with non-vegetarian diets. Now, you have probably seen, you're probably familiar with the food guide pyramid. Well, this is the Diabetes Food Guide Pyramid from an article found in the American Diabetes Association website. And as you can see, the emphasis of a diabetic's diet should be the whole grains and fruits and vegetables. So those are the foods at the base of the pyramid. It is a great misconception to think that people with diabetes should not eat starches or fruit. In fact, it is healthiest for everyone, including diabetics, to eat more whole grains, beans, and starchy vegetables such as peas, corn, sweet potatoes, and winter squash. So starches are good for you because they have very little fat and saturated fat or cholesterol, and they are packed with vitamins, minerals, and fiber. So yes, foods with carbohydrates or starches, such as vegetables, fruits, and dairy products, they're going to raise your blood glucose more quickly than meats and fats, but they are the healthiest foods for you. You may need to maybe watch your portions, space out your carbohydrates throughout the day, and increase your physical activity or adjust your medication. But these foods, the grains and the fruits and the vegetables, are going to be the healthiest for you. I also want to mention briefly about the glycemic index. The glycemic index is a handy tool that identifies foods that increase blood sugar levels very rapidly. So the idea is that you should avoid foods with a high glycemic index, and you should enjoy foods with a lower glycemic index. You can easily find lists of glycemic index in the internet. And high glycemic index foods include sugar itself, white potatoes, most wheat flours products, and most cold cereals. Also watermelon, pineapple, and baking potatoes, like I mentioned before, those are high in glycemic index. But some low glycemic index foods that you can enjoy include pumpernickel, rye, or multigrain bread, old-fashioned oatmeal, bran cereals, most fruits, sweet potatoes, pasta, rice, barley, couscous, beans, peas, and lentils, and most vegetables. Well, let's take a look at the top 10 diabetes superfoods from the American Heart Association website. All of these foods in our list have a low glycemic index. The first one is beans. Beans are such a good, healthy food for you. They are very high in fiber, and they are also a good source of magnesium and potassium, and half a cup of beans provides as much protein as 1 ounce of meat without the saturated fat. Dark green leafy vegetables like spinach, collard, and kale, these are powerhouses of nutrients. They are low in calories and carbohydrates, and you just can't eat too much of them. Also, citrus fruits like grapefruits, oranges, lemons, and limes are good for you. Sweet potatoes, they are starchy, but they're packed full of vitamin A and fiber, and you can replace the white potatoes with the sweet potatoes for a lower glycemic index alternative. Also, you can eat berries. They are full of antioxidants, and tomatoes, and the list includes fish high in omega-3 fatty acids, but I recommend plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids such as walnuts and flaxseed. Also, whole grains are a diabetes superfood, and that includes barley and oatmeal. And nuts are also a superfood for diabetics. An ounce of nuts can go a long way in providing key nutrients such as healthy fats, and they have magnesium and fiber, and some nuts, like I mentioned, are high in the omega-3 fatty acids. Also, fat-free milk and yogurt or fortified non-dairy products like soy milk, they are they are high in vitamin D, which is considered to be helpful in a number of diseases, including diabetes. Now, some of the foods in the list that we just mentioned are tough on the budget depending on the season and where you live. So look for lower cost options such as fruits and vegetables in season, but foods that are very budget friendly can be beans and oatmeal, and so you can have that year round. Our third key to beating diabetes is to avoid refined foods, drinks, and snacks. These are things that are high in calories and low in fiber, such as sweets and sugary drinks, things of that nature. Our fourth key is to beating diabetes is to be physically active. Well, how does exercise help with diabetes? It helps the body to transport glucose into the cells, and it helps lower blood sugar levels. It makes weight management easier. It reduces the risk for heart disease, which is linked to diabetes. And if you take a brisk walk daily, maybe 2 30-minute walks a day, that would be ideal. One of the last points to consider in diabetes is a point concerning infants. There may be an association between cow's milk and increased risk of diabetes in small children. And the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that cow's milk not be given to children less than 1 year of age. Breastfeeding provides some protection against diabetes for both mothers and babies. Now, so far in our Health Bites, we have discussed how to avoid the killer diseases in our society: cancer, heart disease, hypertension, diabetes. But I want you to notice, if you haven't already, that the recommendations for prevention for all of these diseases are basically the same. So let's summarize them. The recommendations are no smoking, avoid obesity, eat more fiber, eat more fruits and vegetables, eat less meat and fat, exercise regularly, and avoid alcohol and caffeine, and limit sodium. Yes, it is tragic to think that it often takes irreversible complications before we really get serious about our lifestyle. The Bible says in Proverbs 27:12, "A prudent person foresees the danger ahead and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences." Yes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So let's start today, disarm diabetes before it happens. And until next time, may you live longer, happier, and healthier the way your Creator intended it.